They say that the years bring wisdom, but pain does not understand calendars or gray hair. I am Edie, and at 74 years old, I learned that a mother's heart is the only organ that can keep beating even after being torn to pieces. It was not old age that hunched my back that night, nor was it the arthritis that sometimes bit into my knees when the weather changed. It was the unbearable weight of the truth falling upon my shoulders. That night, the heat was sticky. It was one of those humid, late August nights where the air just refuses to enter your lungs. My house, that big old house with high ceilings and wooden windows that Robert and I built brick by brick when we were just kids with more dreams than money, was unrecognizable. My son Stephen had insisted on throwing a high-class dinner party. According to him, he needed to impress some new partners. They were people with money, the kind who do not look you in the eye when they greet you, but instead scan your clothes and jewelry to calculate how much you are worth. Robert, my husband, was sitting in his usual armchair in the corner of the dining room. Ever since his last stroke, he did not speak much, but his deep, dark eyes did not miss a single detail. I had placed the napkin over his lap and combed his thinning white hair with cologne, just the way he liked it. Even though his body was fragile, his presence remained my anchor. However, to Stephen, his father and I had become little more than old furniture that clashed with the modern decor his wife, Chloe, had slowly imposed on our own living room. "Mom, please do not start with your old stories tonight," Stephen had warned me in the kitchen while I was finishing arranging the appetizers on the silver tray. "These people are important. I do not want them to think we are old-fashioned." His dry, sharp tone hurt me, but I kept quiet. I kept quiet like I had done so many times in recent years, thinking that prudence was the best way to show love. I smoothed the skirt of my burgundy dress, the best one I owned, and walked out to the dining room with the best smile I could fake. The dinner went on amid forced laughter and the clinking of fine crystal glasses. There were 8 guests in total, not counting us. There was a lawyer with a baritone voice, a blonde woman who could not stop touching her pearl necklace, and a few other characters who looked like they were cut out of a fashion magazine. Stephen presided over the table, swollen with pride, pouring wine and talking about business, investments, and the future. Chloe, by his side, nodded with that rehearsed smile that never quite reached her eyes. I was sitting near the head of the table, trying to be invisible, cutting Robert's meat into small pieces so he could eat without difficulty. But the silence weighed on me. I felt like a stranger at the very table where we had celebrated so many Christmases and birthdays. The conversation then turned to the topic of real estate and architecture. The lawyer praised the structure of the house. "This is a magnificent build," he said, looking up at the dark wooden beams on the ceiling. "They just do not make houses like this anymore. It has historical character." I felt a spark of genuine pride. That house was my life. "Oh, yes," I chimed in, my voice a little shaky from not being used all night. "My Robert brought that wood down from the north himself. I remember we had to wait 3 months because the heavy rains had washed out the roads. And the foundation. We dug the foundation almost with our bare hands because we could not afford heavy machinery." It was back in 1971, right before Stephen was born. I smiled as I remembered those times of sacrifice and love. I looked at the guests, hoping to share that human warmth, that story of hard work that had quite literally cemented the floor they were walking on. But the smile froze on my face. The silence that followed my words was not out of respect, but out of pure discomfort. The woman with the pearls exchanged a mocking glance with her husband. Chloe let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling as if begging for divine patience. But it was Stephen who reacted the worst. I saw his jaw tense up. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his fork. "Mom, please," he hissed through his teeth, though loud enough for those closest to hear. "I was only telling them about your father's hard work, son," I replied, trying to maintain my dignity, even though I felt my cheeks burning. "Nobody cares about those poverty stories, Mom," he said, raising his voice. The alcohol he had been drinking was starting to show in his bloodshot eyes. "It is not poverty. It is history, Stephen," I replied, perhaps making the mistake of contradicting him in public. My voice came out firm. It was a spark of the old Edie, the one who refused to be intimidated. That was when it happened. Stephen stood up abruptly, making the legs of his chair screech against the tile floor. The violence of the movement made Robert give a little jump in his chair, startled. Stephen walked around the table in 2 long strides and grabbed my arm. It was not a gentle touch. His fingers dug into my loose skin with an unnecessary, painful force. He practically yanked me out of my chair. "Come with me," he growled. He dragged me toward the hallway that connected the dining room to the front entrance. He pulled me away from the table, but not far enough for us to stop being the main attraction. The 8 guests sat petrified, their forks halfway to their mouths, watching the scene with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. When we reached the archway of the hall, he let me go with a hard shove. Thank God, in my low-heeled shoes, it was not enough to knock me to the ground, but it was hard enough to make me stumble and crash against the wall. The dull thud of my shoulder against the drywall echoed in my ears. I felt a sharp physical pain, but my soul hurt even more. Stephen stood in front of me, his face twisted with anger and embarrassment. "Mom," he yelled, and his voice bounced off the walls of the house that I had built. "Stop talking to the guests. You are an embarrassment." The echo of his words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "Do you not realize what you are doing?" He kept screaming, waving his hands in my face. "You are talking about misery, about digging dirt with your bare hands. These people are investors, Mom. You are ruining my image. You sound like a senile old woman who does not know when to shut up." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the crickets in the yard dared to chirp. I felt the stares of the 8 people burning into my back like hot needles. I looked toward the table and saw Robert. His eyes were full of tears, one trembling hand reaching out toward me, but he was completely unable to stand up. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, stared down at her plate. It was not out of second-hand embarrassment, but with that cruel indifference of someone who thinks that someone finally put things in their proper place. I stood there pressed against the wall, feeling my heart beating against my ribs like a caged bird. My own son. The little boy whose fevers I had cured with cold washcloths. The man whose college tuition we had paid by selling off a piece of our land. The son for whom Robert and I had taken food out of our own mouths so many times. That man, now a stranger in an expensive suit, was looking at me with pure disgust. In that exact moment, something broke inside of me, but strangely enough, it was not me. What shattered was the veil covering my eyes. The excuse of "he is just stressed out" broke. The justification of "that is just his personality" broke. The hope that deep down he valued our sacrifice completely shattered. The pain in my shoulder transformed into a lucid coldness. A strange, almost terrifying calm flooded my veins. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of floor wax and the roast beef getting cold on the table. Slowly, with a dignity I did not know I still had, I raised my hands and adjusted my blouse. I smoothed out the wrinkles his violent hands had left on the burgundy fabric. I touched my hair to make sure my bun was still in place. I looked up and met his eyes. He was breathing heavily, perhaps expecting me to start crying, to beg for forgiveness, or to run off to my bedroom to hide like a scolded child. That is what the old Edie would have done. But that woman had died against the hallway wall. I held his gaze until he was the one who had to blink, my eyes, dry and hard as river stones, locked onto his. "All right, son," I said softly. My voice did not shake. It was a whisper that sliced through the air like a razor blade. I did not say anything else. There was nothing left to say. I spun on my heels and walked toward the entryway console table where I had left my purse. It was a large, heavy, vintage black leather bag. My hands firmly gripped the handles. Inside that purse rested a blue cardboard folder. It was a folder I had taken out of the bank's safe deposit box that very morning. It contained the original deed to the house and the transfer papers that Stephen had been demanding I sign for months. "It is for the property taxes, Mom," he used to tell me. "It is to protect our assets, Mom." "You guys are too old to manage this now, Mom." That night, I had come down to dinner with the intention of giving him the folder. I had planned to do it after dessert, like a gift, as a display of absolute trust. I was going to hand over control of everything, leaving Robert and me with only a life estate, trusting in his goodness to take care of us. How naive I had been. How blind. I felt the weight of the folder inside the purse. It was heavy, yes, but not as heavy as the betrayal. I walked toward the front door. I heard Stephen's footsteps behind me, confused by my reaction. "Where are you going?" he asked, lowering his voice, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, or maybe just worried about what the guests would think if his mother left like that. "Mom, do not make a scene. Go back and sit down." I stopped with my hand on the solid oak doorknob. I did not turn around. "No, Stephen," I said without looking at him. "You already made the scene and you performed it perfectly." I opened the door. The night air hit my face, humid and warm, but to me, it felt like the purest air in the world. "Mom, what are you doing? You cannot just leave like this," he insisted, taking a step toward me. "Take care of your father." I ordered him with an authority that stopped him dead in his tracks. If he is missing a single hair when I get back, or if I see one tear on his face, I swear on the memory of my dead parents that you will not find a place on heaven or earth to hide. And I walked out. I closed the door behind me gently. No slamming. The click of the lock sounded so final, like the end of a chapter and the beginning of a war. I walked to the end of the porch and walked down the stone steps toward the street. My legs were shaking now, but I kept walking. I did not really have anywhere to go, not at that hour, but I knew I could not stay under that roof for another minute as the humiliated owner. I stopped under the yellowish glow of the corner streetlight. I opened my purse and touched the cold edge of the folder. My power was right there. My history was right there. Robert's sweat and my own were in there. They thought I was a fragile old woman, a burden, an embarrassment who talked too much. They thought the house was theirs by divine right, just waiting for the old lady to sign the little piece of paper. I stroked the leather of the bag. A single tear, hot and furious, rolled down my cheek, but I wiped it away with a rough swipe of my hand. "The tame Edie is gone," I muttered to myself as a cab turned the corner, and I raised my hand to hail it. "It is over." The cab pulled over. The driver, a young man with a tired face, looked at me in surprise. It was not every day you saw an older woman dressed in formal wear, standing alone on a corner at 10 o'clock at night. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. I got in, settled my purse on my lap as if it were a shield, and looked back at the house. Through the dining room window, I could see the silhouettes of the dinner guests. They were still in there, in my house, eating my food, drinking my wine, and despising my life. "Take me to the Plaza Hotel," I said. If I was going to spend my retirement money, I was going to do it in a place where they treated me like a queen, not like an old piece of junk. As the car drove off, I knew that tonight I had not only saved the deed to the house, I had saved myself. The pain in my chest was still there, sharp and piercing, but now it was mixed with something else. It was something I had not felt in a long time. It was the adrenaline of battle. Stephen wanted me to stop talking. Well, I was going to talk now, but not with anecdotes from the past. I was going to talk with the law in my hand, and my voice was going to be heard so loudly that even the foundation we dug with our bare hands was going to shake. Room 402 at the Plaza Hotel smelled like artificial lavender and air-conditioned loneliness. I closed the door and dropped the leather bag onto the perfectly made bed. It was a massive, pristine white bed that seemed to mock my living widowhood. because that was exactly how I felt that night. Even though Robert was breathing just a few blocks away, I had just lost my entire family. I walked over to the vanity mirror and turned on the harsh bathroom light. What I saw knocked the wind out of me with a hard punch to the gut. It was not the usual Edie. The woman staring back at me had smeared mascara under her eyes, marking black streaks across her wrinkled skin, as if she were crying ink. But the ruined makeup was not the worst part. The worst part was the red mark, fresh and furious, that was starting to bloom on my left arm, right where Stephen's fingers had dug in to drag me. I touched the skin gently. It burned. That burning sensation was the fuel I needed to keep from collapsing onto the beige carpet. "You are not going to cry," I ordered myself in the mirror, speaking with a raspy voice I did not even recognize. "You are not going to cry because he would not cry for you." I sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled the purse toward me. I felt the physical relief wash over my legs, but my mind would not rest. My hands, knotted and sun-spotted from years of working the yard and hanging up laundry, trembled as I unzipped the bag. I pulled out the blue folder. For months, Stephen had been pressing me with an urgency that I mistook for concern. "Mom, the estate taxes are straight robbery," he would tell me while pouring himself the whiskey he bought with my credit card. "Mom, if Dad passes away, the government is going to take half of everything. Sign the title transfer. I will take care of managing all of it. You guys just rest." I had been so close to signing it. I swear on my husband's health. That very morning I had gone to the bank with the intention of pulling out the original deed to make the process easier. But something, maybe my mother's spirit whispering in my ear, or just that old intuition that sharpens with age, made me read the paperwork that Stephen had left forgotten on the console table the week before. I turned on the nightstand lamp and spread the documents out over the bedspread. There was the original deed to the house, dated 1971. The paper was yellowed, but Robert's signature, strong and decisive back then, was still perfectly clear. And right next to it was the deed of gift and transfer of rights document that Stephen had drawn up. I put on the reading glasses hanging around my neck and began to read. I did not read it as a mother, but as the woman who had once done the bookkeeping for a successful hardware store before retiring. I read the third clause and then the fifth. The chill from the air conditioning seeped deep into my bones. There was no life estate clause. There was absolutely no provision guaranteeing that Robert and I could live in the house until we died. The document was a total, absolute, and irrevocable transfer. If I had signed those papers, Stephen would have had the legal power to sell the house the very next day, with us still inside it. "Oh my God," I whispered, bringing a hand to my mouth. The betrayal had not started that night in the hallway. That shove in front of the guests had only been the finishing touch on a scheme that had been brewing for months. My son, my own flesh and blood, had planned to leave us out on the street. Why? Robert and I gave him everything. We paid for the electricity, the water, the groceries. He and Chloe lived rent-free on the second floor. What more did he want? I needed answers, and I needed allies. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 11:15 at night. It was late, but desperation does not run on a schedule. I searched for my address book, a worn-out little red leather notebook that I always kept in my purse. I flipped through the pages with anxious fingers until I reached the letter M, Martha. Martha was not family. She was something better. She was an old friend from my younger days. She was a woman who never got married, who smoked skinny cigarettes, and who had worked for 40 years as the head secretary at one of the most cutthroat law firms in the city. Martha knew where half of high society hid their skeletons, because she had typed up the death certificates herself. I had not seen her in 3 years. Stephen had told me that Martha was a bad influence, that she was vulgar, and that she did not fit with the family's new image. And I, being foolish and compliant, had distanced myself. I dialed the number with my heart in my throat. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" answered a gravelly, sleepy voice. "Martha, it is me, Edie." There was a silence on the other end of the line, followed by the flick of a lighter and a deep drag of a cigarette. "Edith," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I thought you had either died or joined a cloistered convent. What are you doing calling at this hour? Did grumpy old Robert finally kick the bucket?" "No, Robert is alive," I said, and my voice cracked. "The one who died was the stupid version of Edie. Martha, I need your help. I am at the Plaza Hotel. I walked out of my house." Martha did not ask stupid questions. She did not ask why or how I was feeling. "I am on my way. Order some black coffee, a lot of it." Half an hour later, Martha was sitting in the armchair in my hotel room. She was wearing a silk robe printed with tropical flowers over her pajamas and thick-framed glasses. She looked like an exotic bird right in the middle of that beige room. I told her everything: the shove, the yelling, the humiliation, the paperwork. While I talked, Martha reviewed the documents with professional speed, flipping through the pages with her nicotine-stained fingers. When I finished telling her about the hallway incident, she snapped the folder shut with a sharp thud. "Cursed be the fruit of your womb, Edie," she said without any sugarcoating. That was just how she was. "That boy is not just a bastard, he is an idiot. Did he really think you were going to sign this without reading it?" "I almost did, Martha. Out of trust." "Trust is for stray dogs, honey. In business and in family, the paperwork does the talking." She took off her glasses and stared right at me. "Listen to me very carefully. You hold all the cards right now, but he is the one sweating bullets. If he is in such a rush to get the house, it is because he is drowning. Nobody tries to scam their parents with that level of desperation unless they are in debt up to their eyeballs." "Do you think so?" I asked in disbelief. "Stephen was always talking about investments, about massive projects." "I do not think so, Edie. I know so. I have a niece who works at the credit bureau. First thing tomorrow morning, we are going to find out exactly how deep of a hole your little prince has dug for himself. But first—" Martha stood up and walked over to the minibar, pulling out a small bottle of water. "First, you need to stop looking like a victim. Look at yourself, Edie. Your shoulders are slumped like you are carrying a sack of potatoes." "My arm hurts," I justified myself. "Let it hurt. Use it. That pain is a reminder. But tomorrow when you walk out of here, you cannot be the fragile little old lady who ran away crying. You have to be the ringmaster of the circus." I did not sleep that night. Martha stayed with me, sleeping on the sofa, snoring softly. I just stared at the ceiling, thinking about Robert. Had he eaten? Had Stephen put him to bed? The anxiety gnawed at me, but I knew that going back right then, weak and without a plan, would be the end of us. I had to be strong for both of us. The next morning, the sun burst through the window without asking for permission. Martha was already awake, talking on her cell phone in a low voice. When she hung up, she had a grim but satisfied expression. "Bingo," she said, turning toward me. "Your son Stephen has 3 mortgages on his import business. He is 4 months behind on the payments for his wife's luxury SUV. And most interestingly, he has a pending lawsuit for breach of contract with some business partners, very sketchy partners." I felt the ground open up beneath me. It was not just ambition. It was blind panic. Stephen wanted the house so he could mortgage it or sell it to cover his financial black holes. He was going to sacrifice his parents' roof just to save his own skin. "Oh my God," I murmured, sitting up in bed. "He was going to leave us out on the street, Martha. He was really going to leave us homeless." "Exactly. And now that you know, what are you going to do about it?" she challenged me. I got up and went to the bathroom. I washed my face with ice-cold water. As I dried off, I looked at my hands. Those hands had kneaded dough. They had mixed concrete. They had changed diapers, and they had held Robert's hand while he learned to walk all over again after his stroke. They were strong hands. They were the hands of a creator. Stephen had soft hands, hands made for asking, hands made for pushing. I walked out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around my head and a new cold metallic determination anchored in my chest. I am going to destroy his plan, Martha. I am going to kick them out of my house, him and his useless wife. Martha smiled, showing off her coffee-stained but fierce teeth. Now that is the right attitude. But you cannot go dressed like that, she said, pointing at my wrinkled burgundy dress draped over the chair. You look like a sad raisin. We are going shopping. What followed was a transformation that was not merely external. We went to a nearby department store. Martha absolutely forbade me from looking at the senior women's section, the one where everything is beige, gray, and completely shapeless. You are the owner of the most valuable piece of real estate on the block, not a nun, she scolded me. She made me try on a tailored navy blue suit. It was deep and elegant, a cream-colored silk blouse, and shoes, comfortable but commanding shoes, made of good leather, the kind of shoes that make a sharp clicking noise when you walk, announcing that someone important has just arrived. When I saw myself in the fitting room mirror, I did not recognize the woman staring back. The clothes did not hang off me. They hugged me. They gave me structure. I stood up straighter. The pain in my shoulder was still there, throbbing under the fabric, but now it felt like hidden war paint. You are missing one thing, Martha said. She dragged me to a high-end salon. No absurd, radical changes. Just a really good haircut, fixing up my gray color so it shined like polished silver instead of looking like old dust, and styling it to pull the hair away from my forehead. Keep your head up, Edie, the stylist told me. You have a face full of character. Do not hide it. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we were sitting in a restaurant eating with a huge appetite. I had the blue folder sitting right on the table next to the salt shaker. Now, let us talk strategy, Martha said, getting serious. Legally, the house belongs to you and Robert. They are guests, very ungrateful guests. In this country, the law protects senior citizens, but the justice system moves slow. If you file for a legal eviction, it could drag on for years. Stephen knows this, and he will use that loophole to squat there in the meantime. I do not have years to wait, Martha. Robert does not have years. Exactly. That is why we are not going to use the courtroom laws just yet. We are going to use the law of fear and the law of money. Martha pulled a slip of paper from her purse. This is a contact. He is an industrial locksmith, the kind who cracks open bank safes and changes high-security locks in minutes. Then she pulled out another piece of paper. And this is a retired police captain who still has his uniform and his badge. And he has owed me a massive favor since 1985. What are you trying to say? I asked, though I was starting to understand. Stephen pushed you. There were witnesses. That is considered domestic battery against a senior citizen. It is a felony, Edie. If we file a police report, they will take him away in handcuffs this very afternoon. I felt a chill run down my spine. Put my own son in jail? The mother living deep inside my soul twisted in pain. Despite everything, he was still the baby I had nursed. No, I said, looking down. I do not want him to go to prison. I do not want that stigma attached to him. You are way too soft, Martha scoffed. It is not softness. It is pity, I replied, looking back up, my eyes turning hard once again. If he goes to jail, he instantly becomes the victim. Poor Stephen. His crazy mother locked him up. No, Martha. I want him to walk out on his own 2 feet. I want him to feel the exact same humiliation he tried to make me feel. I want him to know that I am not some senile old lady. I am the woman who gave him life, and I am the woman who has the power to take it away, financially speaking. Martha looked at me with genuine respect for the first time in years. All right, Then we go with the silent execution. We are going to cut off his water, his power, and his access, but without letting him know it was you until it is way too late. We are going to suffocate him with his own debt. I have some money saved up, I confessed. It is from an account Robert opened 30 years ago, and we never touched it. For emergencies, he used to say. How much? She asked. I told her the exact number. Martha's eyes widened like saucers. It was a lot. It was far more than Stephen ever dreamed of squeezing out of a quick sale of the house. Woman, you are sitting on a literal gold mine, and you are crying in corners. With that kind of cash, we do not just fix the house situation. We can hire private security if we need to. It is not for that, I said, stroking the blue folder. It is my insurance policy, but now I know exactly how to use it. Stephen thinks we are just poor old folks who hide our pennies under the mattress. We are going to let him keep believing that until I decide otherwise. I paid the restaurant bill with my credit card, signing the receipt with a flair I definitely did not possess the day before. Ready to head back? Martha asked. Not yet, I replied. Right now, Stephen is probably tearing my bedroom apart, desperately searching for this folder. He must be sweating cold bullets. We are going to let him suffer a little while longer. We are going to let nightfall come. Let him wonder where his mother is. Let him imagine the absolute worst. And right when he thinks he has won, when he thinks maybe I dropped dead from a heart attack on the street and the house is finally his, that is exactly when I will show up. I stood up, smoothed my navy blue blazer, and grabbed my purse. The weight of the folder was no longer a burden. It was a loaded weapon. Let us head over to the lawyer's office first, I said. I want to draft a new will, one where it is made crystal clear that if Robert and I die tomorrow, the house gets sold, and every single dollar goes straight to charity. I want to see the look on Stephen's face when he finds out his precious inheritance just went up in smoke. We walked out into the afternoon sun. The heat was still suffocating, but I did not feel it anymore. Inside, I was pure ice. For years, I had been tame. I had lowered my head, served the plates, and kept quiet through all the disrespect. But that woman did not exist anymore. She had died against the drywall in the hallway, and from her ashes, this new version of Edie had risen. One who did not need to scream to make herself heard. A mother knows her children's weak points better than anyone in the world. Stephen had just made the fatal mistake of forgetting exactly who taught him how to walk. Now, I was going to teach him how to fall. The cab pulled up in front of the wrought iron gate of my house. It was just after 5 in the afternoon and the sun was starting to set, bathing the stone facade in an orange glow that, in other times, would have seemed warm and welcoming. Now, however, the house looked like an open mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, just waiting to devour me if I made one wrong move. I paid the driver with a crisp new bill and did not wait for the change. Martha had dropped me off 2 blocks away so as not to raise any suspicions. She would arrive the next day at the exact right moment, like a 5-star general appearing right after the infantry had already laid the landmines. I was the infantry. I was the infiltrator inside my own home. I stepped out of the car. The navy blue tailored suit we had bought that morning made me feel completely different. The fabric was firm and structured. It was nothing like the loose, soft dresses I used to wear just to be comfortable around the house. My heels echoed on the concrete sidewalk with an authoritative click-clack that I had never heard come from my own 2 feet. I squeezed the strap of my purse, where the blue folder now rested inside a heavy-duty envelope sealed with industrial tape, and pushed the gate. It was unlocked. A bad omen or just unforgivable carelessness. I walked up the front path, observing the front yard. The hydrangeas were desperately thirsty. Nobody had watered them while I was gone. That tiny detail, that domestic negligence, hurt me more than a lot of the insults. To them, the plants, the house, and us, the old folks, were just things that had to either take care of themselves or quietly die off so as not to be a bother. When I reached the front door, I pulled out my keys. I did not even have time to turn the lock. The door flew open from the inside, as if it had been watched through the peephole with the manic anxiety of a cornered animal. Stephen appeared in the doorway. He was wearing the exact same clothes from the night before. His white dress shirt was wrinkled and unbuttoned at the collar, and his slacks were stained. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his face was covered in a messy, overgrown 5 o'clock shadow. He smelled like stale tobacco and sour sweat. It was the unmistakable stench of male fear. "Mom!" he exclaimed, and in his voice there was a bizarre mix of relief and contained rage. "For the love of God, where have you been? I called the police. I called the hospitals." He took a step toward me, fully intending to grab my arm just like he had done in the hallway, but this time I did not shrink back or cower. I stood perfectly still, straightened my posture, and looked at him with an absolute coldness that stopped him dead in his tracks, his hand hovering halfway in the air. "Do not touch me, Stephen," I said. My voice came out calm and modulated, completely lacking the tremor of the frightened old woman he expected to find. He blinked, confused. His eyes scanned my figure, stopping on the sharp blue suit, my flawless hairstyle, and the brand new shoes. He could not comprehend what he was seeing. His mother, the one who smelled like pot roast and mothballs, had vanished. Standing right in front of him was a woman who looked like a complete stranger. What is all this? What are you wearing?" he stammered, stepping back to let me inside. "Mom, you have been missing for almost 20 hours. Do you have any idea the hell you put us through? Chloe has a terrible migraine because of you. And Dad refused to eat anything." That was the precise stab he was looking for to make me feel guilty. The mention of Robert. But Martha had warned me. "He is going to use your husband as an emotional hostage. Do not fall for it. If you show a single ounce of weakness now, they will eat you alive." I walked into the foyer. The air in the house was stale, heavy with tension. "Your father has not eaten because you simply do not know how to feed him, Stephen," I replied, walking right past him toward the living room. "Do not try to blame your own incompetence on me." "My incompetence?" Stephen slammed the front door shut and followed me, using the heavy footsteps of someone who is used to intimidating people. "I am the one keeping this house standing. I am the one bringing in the investors. And you, last night, you ruined everything. Absolutely everything." We reached the living room. Chloe was there, lying on the sofa with a damp washcloth over her forehead. When she saw me, she sat up abruptly. Her eyes, framed with red puffiness, scanned me with pure disdain, but also with a sick curiosity when she noticed my completely renewed appearance. "You finally show up, Edie," she said, using that drawn-out tone she always used when she wanted to sound superior. "Stephen was about to call the city morgue. We thought you had a heart attack in some random park." "I am so sorry to disappoint you, my dear," I said, setting my purse down on an end table with deliberately slow movements. I did not let go of the handle completely. "I am more alive than ever." I turned back toward Stephen. He was panting slightly, his hands on his hips, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. "Stop playing games, Mom. Where were you?" And then, more importantly, his greedy gaze fell directly on my purse. "Where are the papers? The investors called today. They are furious. I have to fix the massive disaster you caused last night. I need that signature right now." This was exactly where the trap began. I could have screamed at him that I knew all about his debts. I could have told him I knew he was a total financial failure, but that would have only triggered a violent, uncontrollable explosion. I needed him to think he was still in charge. I needed him to believe that I was just throwing a rich old lady's tantrum. I sighed, letting my shoulders drop just a fraction, faking an exhaustion I did not actually feel. I took off the designer sunglasses Martha had bought for me and wiped them with a tissue. "I went away to think, Stephen," I lied, with a smoothness that genuinely surprised me. "I checked into a hotel. I just needed space. Last night was very hard on me." Stephen saw the opening. His posture relaxed just a bit. He thought he saw a crack in my armor. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, adopting that disgusting, condescending tone that con artists always use. "I know, Mom, I know, and I am sorry if I was a little harsh," he said, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. It took a titanic amount of willpower not to brush him off like a cockroach. "But you have to understand the kind of pressure I am under. This is for everyone's own good. Those papers are just to make sure you and Dad do not run into any issues with the IRS. It is strictly to protect you both." Protect us," I repeated, tasting the foul lie. "Yes, son, I have been thinking a lot about that, about the future, about what is best for your father." "Exactly. So, we sign." His anxiety was palpable. It was literally vibrating through his fingertips. "Not so fast," I said, stepping away from him just slightly. "The papers are perfectly safe, but I am not going to sign away my life on the kitchen counter like it is a grocery list. If we are going to do this, Stephen, we are going to do it right. We are going to do it formally." Chloe let out a loud scoff from the sofa. "Oh, please, so now she wants royal protocol? Just sign the damn thing, Edie." I completely ignored her. I kept my eyes locked dead onto my sons. "Tomorrow," I stated firmly. "Tomorrow morning, someone I trust deeply will be coming over, an advisor. I want us to review everything together, calmly, and then we will sign whatever needs to be signed." Stephen frowned, deeply suspicious. "Lee, what advisor? You do not have an advisor, Mom. Your advisor was that old accountant who died 5 years ago. I hired someone new, a very competent woman." I smiled faintly. "Do not worry, son. If everything is completely in order like you say it is, and if this is truly just to protect us, then you will not have any problem with someone else reading the documents before I sign them, right?" I saw absolute panic flash across his eyes for a fraction of a second. I knew his papers were a giant legal trap, but I also knew he was desperate. If he refused, he would confirm that something was wrong. If he accepted, he would buy himself some time. And he believed he could fool any small-town advisor I might bring in. "All right," he finally said, running a hand through his hair. "All right, tomorrow, first thing in the morning." "But Mom, I'm warning you, no more drama. The partners on the debt, the investors, are not going to wait any longer." "The partners on the debt?" I asked, playing deaf. "On the investment, Mom, on the investment. Tomorrow at 9. 9 it is. Now, if you will excuse me, I am going to see my husband." I grabbed my purse firmly and walked toward the hallway. It was the exact same hallway where I had been pushed the night before. This time, I walked through it with my head held high. I felt their eyes on my back, confused and suspicious. But I no longer cared. They had taken the bait. They thought I was going to sign and that I was just setting conditions to save my bruised pride. They did not know I was sharpening the knife. I walked into our bedroom, located on the ground floor. It was dim, with the curtains closed, smelling of confinement and medicine. Robert was sitting in his recliner, staring out the closed window with a vacant expression. He had a soup stain on his pajama shirt. My heart squeezed. "Old man," I whispered. Robert slowly turned his head. Upon seeing me, his eyes lit up with a wet gleam. He tried to stand up, but his legs would not respond. "Edie," he babbled with that thick voice the stroke had left him with. "Edith." I ran to him and hugged him. I buried my face in his neck, feeling his paper-thin skin, his familiar scent. He clung to my new jacket with his trembling hands, sobbing quietly. "I am here, my love. I am here," I told him, kissing his forehead, his cheeks, his hands. "Forgive me for leaving you alone." I had to go find our weapons, Robert. I had to go figure out how to defend ourselves. I pulled back a little to look at him. I wiped his face with my handkerchief. "Listen to me carefully, Robert," I said, looking into his eyes intensely. "Tomorrow is going to be a hard day. There will be yelling, maybe some ugly things said, but I need you to trust me. I will not let them take this house from us. I will not let them take you out of here. Do you understand me?" He nodded, although I was not sure how much of the legal plot he comprehended, but he understood my tone. He understood the promise. I spent the next hour tending to him. I washed him, changed him into clean clothes, and fed him a bowl of soup that I made myself in the kitchen, completely ignoring the hostile presence of Chloe, who was eating yogurt straight from the container while leaning against the counter. "I do not know what you think you are going to achieve, Edith," she told me as I walked past her with the tray. "Stephen is at his absolute limit. If you do not sign tomorrow, things are going to get very ugly. You should stop being so selfish. You two have already lived your lives. Let us live ours." I stopped dead in my tracks. I looked at her. She was a young, pretty woman, if it were not for the perpetual grimace of bitterness that deformed her mouth. "Living your life does not mean devouring ours, Chloe," I said calmly, "and I am going to give you a piece of free advice from woman to woman. Do not bet your future on my son's horse. It is lame and running in the opposite direction." I left her with the words hanging in her mouth and went back to the bedroom. I locked the door. I did not trust them. I jammed a chair under the doorknob. It was an old habit from when we used to live in a rural area, but that night it felt absolutely vital. I sat on the edge of the bed with the blue folder on my lap. I pulled out the cell phone I had bought a year ago and barely used. I dialed Martha's number. "They are desperate," I whispered into the phone. "Stephen admitted almost accidentally that he is in debt. He talked about partners who will not wait. Chloe is terrified even though she disguises it with arrogance." "Excellent." Martha's voice sounded clear and wide awake. "Fear is a great revealer of truths. Do they suspect anything?" "They think I am going to sign. They think I brought in an advisor to check the spelling, not to demolish them." "Perfect. I have everything ready. The new notarized deed, the revocation of power of attorney, and the credit background check printed on very nice paper. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, we are having diamonds for breakfast." Or blood. Martha. I hesitated for a moment. Is it really necessary to be so cruel? "They shoved you against a wall, Edith. They plan to leave your disabled husband out on the street. We are not being cruel. We are being just, and justice, when it arrives late, always looks a lot like revenge." I hung up. I lay down next to Robert, still dressed in my silk blouse, looking up at the ceiling beams that could barely be made out in the darkness. Those were the same beams Robert had sanded by hand 50 years ago. Suddenly, I heard voices on the other side of the door. They were whispers, but in the silence of the night, the walls of the old house conducted sound as if they were copper wires. I got up stealthily and pressed my ear against the wood. "This cannot fail, Stephen. If that old lady does not sign tomorrow, the loan guys are going to come looking for the car, and you know they do not mess around." It was Chloe's voice, hissing and venomous. "She is going to sign," Stephen replied. His voice sounded muffled, perhaps from the alcohol. She looked scared. That suit and that attitude are pure theater. Deep down, she is still the same submissive woman she has always been. I will tell her that if she signs, we will build a guest house in the backyard for them to live in. She will believe it. A guest house? We do not even have money for bricks. She does not know that. Once the house is mine, I will mortgage it for its full value, pay off the loan sharks, and with whatever is left over, well, we will see what we do with my parents. Maybe a state-run nursing home. They say there are some decent ones out there. I felt as if someone had injected acid directly into my veins. I covered my mouth to stop myself from letting out a scream of pure rage. A state-run nursing home, after giving them absolutely everything, after paying for his private college, the cars, the weddings. My son, my Stephen, was planning to dispose of us as if we were organic trash. I backed away from the door, trembling, but it was not out of fear. Oh no. The fear had completely evaporated, leaving in its place a crystalline clarity, cold and sharp as a diamond. I went back to bed and took Robert's hand. He was sleeping, completely oblivious to the betrayal brewing on the other side of the wall. "Sleep, old man," I whispered to him. "Sleep peacefully, because tomorrow, when the sun comes up, your son is going to meet the true owner of this house." I did not sleep a wink that night. I stayed awake guarding my weapons, mentally rehearsing every single word I was going to say and every piece of paper I was going to pull out. The silent execution had officially begun. They believed I was the cornered prey in the bedroom, just waiting for their mercy. They did not know that, in reality, I was the hunter who had just locked the cage door with them trapped inside. I looked at the clock. 4 a.m, 5 hours left. I got up and went to the bathroom. I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were shining in the shadows. "Nobody cares about those poverty stories, Stephen." I repeated his words, savoring them with pure bitterness. "You are absolutely right. Tomorrow I am going to tell you a story about wealth, about my wealth, and about your utter misery." I went back to the room and started packing Robert's suitcase. Not much, just the absolute essentials. Because no matter what happened tomorrow, I knew the energy in that house was going to change so radically that we might need to go back to the hotel for a few days, just until the smell of sulfur aired out. At 6 a.m, I heard Stephen leave the house. He was probably going out to buy bagels or trying to calm his nerves with a coffee down the street. I seized the moment. I slipped out of the room, crossed the silent hallway, and went right into his home office, which used to be Robert's library. The mess was monumental. Loose papers, unopened collection letters, empty bottles of liquor. I went straight to his desk. I did not need to search for long. Right in the trash can, crumpled up like a mistake, was a notice of a preventative property lien. I smoothed it out and put it safely into my pocket. It was the silver bullet. I went back to my room before he returned. I got dressed in my navy blue suit again. I applied my makeup carefully, covering the bags under my eyes and painting my lips a discreet but firm shade of red. By 8:30, the house started to wake up. It smelled like burnt coffee. Stephen and Chloe were in the kitchen, talking in low voices, rehearsing their fake smiles, completely setting the stage to sweet-talk the little old lady. I sat in my armchair with the folder on my lap, just waiting for the doorbell to ring. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Martha, and she had not come alone. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and opened my bedroom door. I walked out into the hallway. Stephen was coming from the foyer with a nervous smile glued to his face with cheap adhesive. "Mom, your advisor is here," he said with a poorly disguised mocking tone. "Show her into the dining room, Stephen," I ordered him without stopping. "And call your wife down. Both of you take a seat. Class is about to begin." "Class?" he asked, frowning. "Yes, son. The life lesson I should have given you years ago. I am going to give you today." I walked into the dining room. The table was set, but there was no food. It was just the bare, shiny wood, completely ready to receive the verdict. I sat at the head of the table, the exact spot Stephen had usurped the night of the dinner party. I placed the blue folder on the table with a sharp thud. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The trap was set, and they had just placed their foot right in the center of it. The front door opened, and the frightened little old lady my son was expecting did not walk through it, nor did a simple, gossipy neighbor. Martha walked in, and she walked in as if she owned the very air we were all breathing. At 68 years old, my friend maintained the bearing of a 5-star general in peacetime, alert, upright, and extremely dangerous. She was wearing a steel gray tailored suit that looked laser cut, holding a leather briefcase under her arm, and wearing dark sunglasses that she took off with theatrical slowness as she crossed the threshold. Her eyes, lined with surgical precision, swept the room and landed on Stephen with the pure indifference of someone looking at a stain on the rug. "Good morning," Martha said. Her voice was deep, raspy from tobacco, but with absolutely perfect diction. "I am attorney Martha Yates, legal and financial advisor to Mrs. Edith." Stephen blinked, totally bewildered. He was expecting some friend from church with a Bible tucked under her arm, not a woman who smelled like expensive perfume and court rulings. "Attorney?" he repeated, letting out a nervous little laugh. "Mom, please, where did you dig up this lady? This is a family matter. We do not need lawyers." I was standing next to the head of the table. Robert, my husband, was sitting to my right, staring into the void with his watery eyes, but he was clean and dignified in his freshly ironed shirt. "Sit down, Stephen," I ordered. My voice left absolutely no room for argument. I pointed to the chair across from me, at the far end of the table, as if he were a defendant in a courtroom. "And you too, Chloe." Chloe rolled her eyes but obeyed, crossing her arms with that spoiled brat gesture I hated so much. Stephen, grumbling under his breath about wasting time and absurd theatrics, sat down and placed his own documents on the table, the transfer contract he was so desperate for me to sign. Martha took a seat to my left. She opened her briefcase with a sharp click that echoed in the silence of the dining room like the cocking of a gun. She pulled out a yellow legal pad, a gold fountain pen, and finally, a red folder that I had not seen before. "All right," Stephen said, drumming his fingers against the wood. "Let us get this over with quickly. My investors are expecting me at 11. Mom, here is the modified document. I added a verbal clause where I promise to take care of you both forever. Just sign on the last page." He pushed the papers toward me, sliding them across the polished surface of the table. I did not even look at them. I just kept my eyes locked on his. "Martha," I said softly, "please enlighten my son on his current situation." Martha adjusted her reading glasses on the tip of her nose. She picked up Stephen's papers with the tips of 2 fingers, as if they were heavily contaminated, and gave them a quick glance. "Complete garbage," she ruled, dropping them back on the table. "An unconscionable contract of adhesion, drafted by a total amateur, if you will pardon my bluntness. A full ownership clause with absolutely no reservation for a life estate. In plain English, you wanted your parents to hand over the house to you for free, leaving them out on the street at the mercy of your goodwill. And judging by your credit history, your goodwill is not even worth the paper it is written on." Stephen's face went from annoyance to pure rage in a split second. "Listen here, you insolent old bat," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. "Who do you think you are talking to me like that in my own house?" "Correction," I interjected. My voice was a cracking whip. "In my house." Stephen spun toward me, his mouth hanging open. "Mom, are you really going to let her insult me? I am your son." "You are my son, yes." I nodded, feeling a sharp pain in my chest but standing my ground firmly. "But you are also a liar, Stephen, and you are a coward." "What are you talking about?" he asked, though I saw the color instantly drain from his cheeks. Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. Martha opened her red folder. "Let us talk numbers, Stephen," she said in a clinical tone, completely devoid of emotion. "Let us talk about the second mortgage you took out on your commercial space. Let us talk about being 3 months behind on the private school tuition for your kids, my client's grandchildren, which, by the way, you constantly claim to pay right on time. And let us talk, above all, about the commercial lawsuit docket number 458B that was filed yesterday in civil court." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Chloe sat straight up in her chair, staring at her husband with wide eyes. "Lawsuit?" she shrieked. "Stephen, what is she talking about? You told me the business was doing fantastic." Stephen stammered, desperately looking for a way out. A lie to cover the massive hole. But Martha gave him no quarter. "You owe $400,000, Stephen," Martha continued, reading straight from the report. "And your partners, those guys you like to call investors, are not bankers. They are private loan sharks, extremely dangerous people. The kind of people who do not just garnish bank accounts, they break legs. Stephen slumped down in his chair. It looked as if someone had removed all his bones. He dragged his hands down his face in sheer desperation. "Mom!" His voice cracked, turning into a pathetic whimper. "Mom, you have to understand. It was just a bad streak. An investment went bad. I need the house. If I mortgage the house, I can pay them off. I can get out of this mess, I swear. Afterward, I will make the money back and what about us?" I asked. I stood up slowly, resting the palms of my hands on the table so they would not see how badly I was shaking. "What was supposed to happen to your father and me while you played businessman with the roof over our heads? I was going to take care of you," he yelled, with hot tears of frustration in his eyes. "I was going to build you the guest house. I would never leave you out on the street." That was the exact moment, the moment of absolute truth. I reached into the pocket of my navy blue blazer and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper I had rescued from his trash can that morning. I placed it flat on the table, but that was not enough. I needed him to know that I knew absolutely everything. "I did not sleep last night, Stephen," I said, lowering my voice into a lethal whisper. "Last night, when you thought the foolish old lady was sound asleep, I walked over to your door." Stephen froze completely. His eyes locked onto mine, completely filled with panic. "I heard your entire plan," I continued, feeling how every single word tore at my throat. "I heard your wife say that if I did not sign, the loan guys would come for the car. And I heard you, my own flesh and blood, say that you would send us to a state-run nursing home." Chloe let out a muffled gasp and covered her mouth. Stephen shook his head frantically. "No, Mom, not that. I did not mean... I was drunk. I was." "Shut up!" I screamed. The sound ripped out of my gut with such force that Robert jumped in his chair. "Shut your mouth! You dared to call me an embarrassment in front of your friends. You shoved me in the hallway of the very house your father built with his bare hands, and now you have the nerve to sit there and tell me you are not going to lock us up in a home just to save your own skin?" My hands clenched into tight fists. I felt an ancient power surging through me. It was the power of every mother who has ever been betrayed, but absolutely refuses to be a victim. You are not a businessman, Stephen. You are a spoiled brat who broke his toys and now wants to sell his parents' furniture to pay for the damages. Stephen stood up violently, his face bright red with a mix of fury and intense shame. The humiliation was entirely too much for his inflated ego. "It is my inheritance," he roared, slamming his fist down on the table. "Sooner or later, this house will be mine. Dad does not even know who he is anymore, and you are old. You guys cannot manage all of this. You have an obligation to help me." "Nobody has an obligation to fund their own total destruction," Martha interjected, calmly snapping her folder shut. "And regarding that inheritance, Edith, do the honors." I picked up the blue folder, the original one. It contained the deed and the brand new will we had urgently drafted that very morning before coming back. "I went to the attorney's office this morning," I said, staring at my son with a coldness that even frightened myself. "I have completely revoked the previous will. I have revoked any and all power of attorney you held over our accounts or assets." I opened the folder and showed him the first page. "As of today, the house is bulletproof inside an irrevocable trust. If your father and I pass away, the property will be sold, and 100% of the proceeds will be donated to the Senior Care Foundation." Stephen's jaw literally dropped to the floor. Chloe stood up in pure hysterics. "You are completely out of your mind," she shrieked. "You cannot do that. That is our children's future inheritance." "Your children have young, healthy parents who are perfectly capable of getting jobs," I replied without even looking at her. "My assets are mine and Robert's, and we have just decided that we are not going to finance our own executioners." Stephen looked at me with unadulterated hatred. There was no trace left of the little boy who used to ask me for bedtime stories. Now there was only a cornered stranger. "I am not going to allow this," he hissed, walking around the table toward me with an implicit threat in his posture. "I will not let some crazy old lady ruin my life. Sign those papers right now, or I swear to God I will." He never got to finish the sentence. Martha pulled out her cell phone and placed it on the table with the speakerphone turned on. "Captain," she said, "did you catch all of that?" "Loud and clear, counselor," answered a deep, authoritative male voice from the phone. "I have 2 squad cars sitting right on the corner. Do we proceed?" Stephen stopped dead in his tracks, as pale as a ghost. He stared at the phone, then at Martha, and finally at me. "You called the cops?" he whispered in sheer disbelief. "On your own son?" "You shoved me against a wall first, Stephen," I said, and for the very first time, a single solitary tear rolled down my cheek. It was not out of fear, but out of deep mourning. I was burying my son alive. "You broke the sacred pact of this family, not me." I stepped closer to him. Despite my heels, he was taller than me, but in that moment I felt like an absolute giant. "You have exactly 1 hour, I decreed. "What?" "You have 1 hour to pack up your things and your wife's things and get out of my house. Clothes and personal items only. Absolutely no furniture and none of the appliances that I paid for. Take only what you brought with you when you moved in here as freeloaders 5 years ago. Mom, you cannot just kick us out. We have nowhere to go. You have plenty of investor friends, do you not?" I reminded him of his own words with sharp cruelty. "Go stay with them, or go to the hotel where I had to sleep last night because my own son made me feel like an unwanted guest in my own home." "Dad!" Stephen tried to appeal to Robert, running over and dropping to his knees beside his chair. "Dad, say something to her. Mom has gone totally insane." Robert, who had been watching the entire scene with intermittent lucidity, slowly turned his head. He looked down at Stephen. This was the son he had broken his back for, working double shifts in construction. Robert raised his trembling hand. Stephen actually thought his father was going to stroke his face. He thought he was going to comfort him, but Robert curled his hand into a weak fist and with a titanic effort gently struck Stephen's arm, pushing him away. "Get out!" Robert croaked. It was a guttural sound, difficult to understand, but his intention was as clear as crystal. "Bad son!" Stephen recoiled as if he had just been slapped across the face. Chloe was already running toward the stairs, crying and cursing under her breath. She understood that the ship had completely sunk and it was time to grab a lifeboat. 1 hour, Stephen, I repeated, utterly relentless. Martha is going to stay right here to make sure you do not take so much as a silver spoon. And there is a locksmith waiting out by the back door to change every single lock the second you step off this property. Stephen looked at me one last time. He searched my eyes for any trace of doubt, for the permissive mother who always forgave everything. But all he found was a solid stone wall. "You are going to seriously regret this, Edith," he spit with venom. "You are going to die alone." "I would much rather be alone than in terrible company," I replied with a calm that chilled my own blood. "And do not get it twisted. I am not alone. I have my dignity, and I have my house." Stephen let out a loud scream of pure frustration. He kicked an empty chair that crashed loudly to the floor, and he ran up the stairs right after his wife. I stood in the middle of the dining room, listening to the slamming doors and muffled shouting coming from the second floor. The noise of absolute chaos, the noise of a deep cleaning. Martha closed her folder and gave me a faint smile. She did not say a word. It was not necessary. She stood up and walked over to the foot of the stairs to fulfill her duty as a guard dog. I turned back to Robert. He was crying silently. Thick tears were falling onto his shirt. I sat down next to him and took his hand. His fingers squeezed mine with surprising strength. "It is over, old man," I told him, stroking his white hair. "It is finally over." It hurt us, yes. A massive piece of our hearts had been ripped out, but the roots were still there. I looked around the living room. The dark wooden beams seemed even stronger now. The morning sunlight poured through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. It was my dust, my sunlight, my house. The brutal confrontation was over. There were no physical blows aside from that kicked chair, but the emotional violence had been completely devastating. However, as I listened to my son dragging his suitcases across the floor upstairs, I felt something strange blooming inside my chest. It was not joy. It was peace. It was the deep, terrifying peace that arrives right after a massive storm, when you survey the wreckage and realize that miraculously, the foundation actually held up. I smoothed the skirt of my blue suit. I felt incredibly tired. It was an exhaustion that seeped deep into my bones. But my head was still held high. I had reclaimed my territory. I had reclaimed my voice. And even though the price had been losing a son, I had earned the absolute right to live out my final years without fear. "Would you like some coffee, Robert?" I asked him softly. He nodded. I got up and walked toward the kitchen. I stepped right over the fraudulent contract papers that Stephen had left scattered on the floor. I did not even bother picking them up. They were already garbage. They were just wet paper crashing against the solid rock of my willpower. As I put the kettle on to boil, I heard the police sirens approaching in the distance, not to arrest anyone, but to make sure the eviction order was carried out peacefully. I smiled with deep sadness. They say if you raise crows, they will peck out your eyes. But they forgot to mention that sometimes a mother's eyes eventually learn how to see perfectly in the dark. And once they do, there is not a crow in the world that can deceive them anymore. The noise of the suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor upstairs sounded like distant thunder. It was a harsh, scraping sound that marked the end of an era and the true beginning of my freedom. There were no tender goodbyes, no fake hugs, and certainly no promises to keep in touch. That final hour was a carefully choreographed dance of fury and embarrassment, executed entirely under the impassive gaze of Martha. And of course, the strong deterrent of two police officers waiting out on the sidewalk, their arms crossed, their dark sunglasses reflecting my son's ultimate defeat. Stephen came down the stairs lugging 3 heavy suitcases. His face was drenched in sweat, and a grimace of pure hatred completely deformed his features. It made him look like a total stranger, like some monster that had taken over the skin of the baby boy I had given birth to. Chloe followed closely behind him, dragging her designer bags. Her makeup was smeared, and she was muttering vile curses under her breath. They looked like refugees fleeing their own toxic ambition, officially expelled from the paradise they refused to take care of. I stood tall right next to the open front door, my hands folded neatly over my stomach, feeling the heavy weight of the gold rings Robert had given me for our anniversaries. I never once lowered my gaze. I refused to give them the sick satisfaction of seeing me cry, even though my insides were twisting as if I had swallowed crushed glass. "This is not over, Edith," Chloe spat as she walked past me. She stopped for a brief second just to dig her bloodshot eyes into mine. "You are going to regret this. When Robert finally dies and you are left all alone in this massive mausoleum, you will remember us, and nobody is going to come help you. Nobody. I would much rather die alone and in absolute peace than live surrounded by vultures just waiting for me to stop breathing so they can peck my eyes out," I replied. My voice came out incredibly serene. It held a calm that could only come from the absolute certainty of doing the right thing. Stephen stopped right in the doorway. For a split second, I saw a flash of hesitation in his eyes. Maybe it was a fleeting memory of the days when I used to bandage up his scraped knees. He looked back inside the house, toward the armchair where his father was sitting, his back completely turned to him. "Dad," he whispered. Robert did not move a single muscle. His rejection was a massive wall of silence, far taller and much stronger than any scream could ever be. "Leave, Stephen," I ordered him, pointing toward the street with a sharp nod of my head. "Your partners are waiting for you. Your massive debt is waiting for you. You are out of credit here." He clenched his jaw tight, nodded with a toxic mix of resentment and total resignation, and walked out into the suffocating afternoon heat. I watched him load up the trunk of his luxury SUV. It was a car he was probably going to lose to the bank in a matter of weeks. He packed it under the curious, whispering gazes of all the neighbors who had peeked out their windows, completely drawn in by the flashing lights of the police cruiser. Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor from across the street, gave me a subtle nod. It was a silent gesture of solidarity between two older women who understand perfectly well that dignity is never up for negotiation. When the car engine roared and they sped off, burning rubber, I felt the air finally rush back into my lungs. "They are gone," Martha said, appearing right by my side and placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "It is over, woman. Just breathe." But there was absolutely no time to collapse. Not yet. "Arthur," I called out to the locksmith who had been waiting very discreetly in the kitchen. "It is your turn. I want everything completely changed. The front door, the back door, the garage entrance. And I want heavy-duty deadbolts, the kind that will not budge even with a stick of dynamite." For the next 2 hours, the loud whine of power drills and the sharp smell of metal oil completely filled the house. To my ears, it was like heavenly music. Every single old lock that hit the floor was another heavy link breaking off the chain that had bound me to fear. Meanwhile, Martha and I walked through the house, throwing all the windows wide open. We let the afternoon breeze, warm but incredibly clean, sweep away the lingering smell of Chloe's cheap perfume and the stench of Stephen's stale tobacco. When Arthur handed me the brand new set of keys, I felt their cold, deeply comforting weight resting in the palm of my hand. There were 4 shiny, silver, untouched keys. "Here you go, Mrs. Edith," the man said, taking off his cap with genuine respect. "Nobody gets in here without your direct permission." I gladly paid him, adding a very generous tip on top of the bill. When I closed the front door behind him and slid the heavy new deadbolt into place, the loud metallic click echoed through the foyer like the final binding seal on a sacred contract. I turned around and looked at my house. It was completely silent. But it was not that oppressive, heavy silence from before, loaded with thick tension and nasty conspiratorial whispers. It was a pure, clean silence. It was our silence. I walked over to the armchair where Robert was sitting. He had fallen fast asleep, completely exhausted from the intense strain of the day. His chest was rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm that I had not seen in months. I sat down next to him, took his hand in mine, and finally allowed myself to truly cry. I cried for the son I had lost, not on that day, but years ago when money suddenly became much more important to him than his own blood. I wept the bitter grief of a mother who was forced to amputate her own limb just to save the rest of the body. But they were deeply healing tears. They were like the heavy rain that washes the sky completely clean after a brutal storm. The days that followed the eviction were a strange swirling mix of phantom pain and a slow, steady rebirth. The house felt absolutely massive, yes, but it no longer felt hostile. Martha kept her promise not to leave us alone. She moved right into the guest bedroom for an entire week, organizing all our legal affairs with the ruthless efficiency of an army general. Together, we marched down to the bank, where I was greeted personally by the branch manager. When I showed him the documents proving the attempted fraud and my official revocation of power of attorney, the man turned completely pale. We immediately canceled all the authorized user credit cards that Stephen had been swiping. We locked down the joint checking accounts and set up a strict, ironclad trust fund, guaranteeing that every single penny of our life savings would be used exclusively for Robert's well-being and my own. Your son tried to access the checking account yesterday, Martha informed me 3 days later as we ate breakfast out in the backyard. The teller told him the account was frozen by direct order of the primary account holder. I heard he threw a massive tantrum in the lobby, but he eventually had to walk out with his tail tucked firmly between his legs. Do we know anything else about him? I asked, stirring my coffee and staring off into the hydrangeas, which were finally blooming again thanks to my careful watering. The bank repoed the luxury SUV, she said bluntly, and the apartment they moved into is an absolute dump on the outskirts of town. Chloe already packed up and moved back into her mother's house. Word around town is they are officially separated. Stephen is completely alone trying to dodge the lawsuits. I felt a sharp pang of pity. It was that raw maternal instinct begging me to run out and rescue him, to pay off his massive debts, to bring him back home. But then I looked over at Robert. He was sitting out in the warm sun, reading the morning paper with a magnifying glass, softly humming an old tune. His health had improved miraculously the second all the toxic tension vanished from our home. His hands did not shake nearly as much anymore. He was finally eating with a real appetite. He was smiling again. If I brought Stephen back into this house, it would literally kill my husband. May God help him, I said quietly, permanently closing that heavy chapter in my heart, because I had already helped him far too much. The true transformation, however, was not just legal or financial. It was deeply internal. It was rediscovering exactly who Edith was when she was not playing the role of a mother or a helpless victim. One afternoon, I walked up to the second floor. I went into the bedrooms that Stephen and Chloe had occupied. They had left the walls scuffed and the carpets badly stained. Instead of locking the doors and letting the rooms gather dust and old ghosts, I decided to reclaim the space. I hired a crew of painters. I had them paint the walls a bright, luminous cream color. I ripped up the nasty old carpet and exposed the original hardwood floors beneath, which we polished until they shined like a mirror. "What are you going to do with all that extra room, Edie?" Robert asked me one night while we were eating homemade chicken noodle soup. We were totally at peace, without anyone sneering at us for enjoying a simple meal. "I have been thinking, old man," I told him, serving him another scoop of noodles. "This house is huge and we are getting older. We need a little help around here, but I do not want some random nurse who just clocks in and out. I want real life back inside this house. Good life." I put up an advertisement over at the local college's nursing program. It read, "Spacious bedroom with private bathroom for rent to a senior nursing student. Extremely low rent in exchange for evening companionship and light assistance for an elderly adult." I interviewed 5 different candidates. Martha was present for every single interview, of course, playing the role of guard dog. She ran intense criminal background checks and scrutinized their references. But in the end, I made my choice with my heart. Her name was Sophie. She was 23 years old. She came from a rural area down south, and she had the rough, calloused hands of someone who had worked out in the fields. They looked exactly like my hands did 50 years ago. When she walked into our house, she did not scan the furniture to calculate its cash value. She looked right at the framed photos of Robert and me on the mantelpiece and smiled. "What a beautiful family you have," she said with total sincerity. Sophie moved in the very next month. She took over Stephen's old bedroom, but she completely transformed the entire energy of the space. Where there used to be angry shouting and endless demands, there was now soft music playing and the comforting smell of old textbooks. Sophie would study in the living room at night. Sometimes when Robert woke up feeling disoriented, she would be right there before I even got out of bed. She would hold his hand, speak to him with such gentle sweetness, and check his blood pressure with a perfect mix of medical professionalism and genuine affection. With the symbolic rent that Sophie paid and my life savings now completely protected, I hired a cleaning lady to come by 3 times a week to help with the heavy scrubbing. For the first time in my entire life, I finally stopped washing the floors on my hands and knees. I went out and bought myself new clothes. I completely stopped wearing those sad, dreary little old lady dresses. I followed Martha's advice and filled my closet with rich, vibrant colors, deep navy blues, bright emerald greens, soft fabrics that gently caress the skin. I started attending a local book club on Tuesdays and took ballroom dancing classes on Thursday evenings. Robert could not dance anymore, but he absolutely loved going with me just to watch me move. He would clap from his wheelchair with the huge, bright smile of a man deeply in love. Then one afternoon, 6 months after the massive eviction, the phone rang. It was Stephen. I stared down at the caller ID on the screen. My heart did a hard flip in my chest, but my hands did not tremble. I let it ring 3 full times before picking up the receiver. Hello? Mom. His voice sounded raspy, totally broken, and incredibly humble, or fake humble. I already knew how to tell the difference. Mom, it is me, Stephen. I know exactly who you are, I said dryly. Mom, I'm in a really bad place. I truly am. I am renting a tiny attic room. I do not have a job anymore. Chloe left me for good. I am completely alone. He paused for a long second, fully expecting me to fill that heavy silence with warm, maternal comfort. I did not do it. I really need to see you, Mom. I need to come back home. I promise you I will change. I promise I will do whatever you say. You and Dad need me. I let out a slow sigh, looking out through the large window overlooking the backyard. Right out there was Sophie, happily helping Robert prune a large rose bush, laughing loudly at one of the old man's jokes. The bright afternoon sun was hitting their faces. They looked incredibly happy. They looked completely at peace. No, Stephen, I said very softly. We do not need you. What? How can you say that to me? I am your son. You are my son, and I do love you, and I pray for you every single night, I told him. And that was the absolute truth. But you no longer have a place in this house. You permanently broke something that cannot be glued back together with last-minute promises. You are just going to leave me out on the street, he screamed. And right there, it was again. The demanding tone, the pure, crouching fury. I did not leave you on the street. You chose your own path the very second you decided your parents were an annoying obstacle instead of your family. You are 45 years old, Stephen. It is time for you to finally be a man. Go find a job. Pay off your massive debts. And maybe someday down the road, if you can actually prove that you have changed for real without asking for anything in return, maybe then we can grab a cup of coffee at a neutral spot. But as long as I am breathing, you will never sleep inside this house again. I hung up the phone before he even had a chance to respond. I just stood there staring at the receiver for a few seconds, feeling a single tear run down my cheek. But this time, I wiped it away instantly. I walked over to the mirror in the foyer. The woman staring back at me did not have slumped shoulders or the sad eyes of a beaten dog anymore. She had deep wrinkles, yes, a lot more than before. She had completely white hair combed back with absolute pride. But inside her eyes, there was a bright gleam of tempered steel. She was Edith, the fierce woman who built a house with her bare hands, the woman who saved her disabled husband, and the woman who had the sheer courage to prune her own family tree so the main trunk would not rot away. I walked out into the backyard. The fresh air smelled like wet dirt and blooming jasmine. Robert saw me walking over and raised his hand. "Edie, look," he told me, pointing a shaky finger at a flawless, bright red rose that had just opened up. "This one is just for you." I took the flower and inhaled its sweet scent. They say that old age is a season of profound loss, and it is entirely true. I lost my only son that night in the hallway. I permanently lost the silly illusion of the perfect television commercial family, but I gained something infinitely more valuable in return. I won myself back. I won my respect. And I won the total peace of mind knowing that when I close my eyes for the very last time, I will do it in my own bed, under my own roof, completely surrounded by genuine love and not by some inherited toxic obligation. At 74 years old, I finally learned that shared blood only makes you relatives, but it is absolute loyalty that makes you family. And I learned that it is never, absolutely never too late to slam a door shut and start all over again. The house was completely calm, and finally, so was I.